Vamos. Okay. En honor al tiempo, vamos a dar comienzo a esta reunión técnica sobre la encuesta de construcción y obras civiles, que es parte de los requerimientos del Programa de Comparación Internacional, y vamos a tocar los temas referentes al ciclo 2021. Antes de comenzar, algunos detalles técnicos. Abajo en su pantalla verán un botón a la derecha que dice Interpretation o interpretación, donde podrán seleccionar el idioma en el que quieren seguir la reunión. ¿Ya? Tendremos disponible interpretación español-inglés. En inglés, some technical details before starting. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a button on the right-hand side that says Interpretation, where you can select the language in which you want to follow the meeting. Okay? So, vamos a comenzar viendo la agenda del día de hoy. Es bastante intensa. Tendremos esta reunión técnica en 2 sesiones, la de hoy miércoles y mañana jueves, en el mismo horario, en sesiones de 2 horas y media, y tendremos las palabras de bienvenida y el panorama general del programa a nivel global. Luego tendremos el panorama general de la encuesta de la construcción y obras civiles para el ciclo 2021, y vamos a comenzar con la sesión 3, que habla sobre la lista de los productos y los datos necesarios para la encuesta de la construcción en el ámbito del programa Comparación Internacional para América Latina y el Caribe. Vamos a dar una mirada al formulario, a las directrices para la recolección de precios y a la lista de productos y especificaciones. El día de mañana seguiremos con la lista y los datos necesarios para las encuestas de construcción, todo lo referente a la sesión 3, y vamos a seguir en la sesión 3 con todo lo que tiene que ver con validación intra e intereconomías, y una sesión de preguntas y comentarios a todas las sesiones anteriores. Por último, vamos a tener unas sesiones la sesión 4, de lecciones de la encuesta de la construcción en la ronda 2017, donde tendremos algunas de las conclusiones y resultados más relevantes para América Latina y a nivel global. Y por último, vamos a tener una sesión de conclusiones y los próximos pasos. Así es que sin más, después de haber revisado la agenda para este taller técnico sobre la encuesta de construcción que tomará estos 2 días, le doy la palabra a Ana Victoria Vega, que es la jefa del área de estadísticas económicas dentro de la división de estadísticas, quien nos dará sus palabras de bienvenida para este taller.
Muchas gracias, Claudia. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí en esta reunión técnica de encuestas especiales de la construcción en el marco del Programa de Comparación Internacional del ciclo 2021. Buenos días a todos, buenos días a nuestros colegas William y Rui del Banco Mundial. Buenos días a todos los expertos y los puntos focales tanto de cuentas nacionales como del área de precios, de los institutos de estadística y los bancos centrales de nuestra región. Bienvenidos todos. En primer lugar, quisiera darles la bienvenida y agradecerles de nuevo por estar en esta reunión virtual que hace parte de la implementación del ciclo 2021 del Programa de Comparación Internacional para América Latina y el Caribe, en el que nuestra división participa como coordinador regional de acuerdo a los lineamientos globales del Programa de Comparación Internacional. La idea de esta reunión, como mencionaba Claudia y como lo mostraba en la agenda, es una reunión específica para poner en contexto y entregar los lineamientos para llevar adelante estos requerimientos del programa en relación a la encuesta sobre construcción y obras civiles. Como también es un espacio para poder discutir sobre los elementos más relevantes de esta parte del programa. Dada la complejidad de este tema, para esta reunión hemos decidido hacer una sola reunión para toda América Latina y el Caribe. Como Claudia explicaba, se realizará entre los días de hoy y mañana en 2 sesiones, cada una de 2 horas y media, y tendremos traducción simultánea para mayor claridad y en los 2 idiomas. Durante estos 2 días contaremos también con presentaciones de nuestros colegas del Banco Mundial, de otros colegas de la unidad, de la División de Estadísticas Económicas de la CEPAL, y tendremos la participación de un experto en el área de construcción, el señor Aaron Witch, quien profundizará en las especificaciones de esta encuesta. También tendremos la oportunidad de hacer todos los comentarios y consultas para tener mejores resultados en la implementación de esta parte del programa en nuestra región. Así que aquí una invitación especial a todos los participantes para que nos hagan saber sus comentarios, sus dudas, sus inquietudes en cada momento de las presentaciones. En especial, se revisará el enfoque metodológico en la medición de las paridades de poder adquisitivo en el ámbito de la construcción y cómo se integra esta información en la medición de los precios de la inversión. Se dará un panorama general de la encuesta para luego ir en detalle a la lista de los productos de esta misma encuesta y las recomendaciones para la recolección de los precios, tomando en consideración los tipos de material, las unidades de medida, entre otras especificaciones. Se abordarán también métodos para la validación de esta información y se revisarán las lecciones aprendidas del ciclo 2017 en la recolección de precios de los productos de la construcción que nos servirán para enfrentar de mejor manera el ciclo actual. Como ven, serán 2 jornadas intensas y esperamos que esta reunión técnica sea muy fructífera para todos, que saquemos el mejor provecho de cada una de las presentaciones y se puedan llevar los elementos que requieren para poder hacer la recolección en cada uno de sus países. Bienvenidos todos y muchas gracias por estar aquí presentes y atendiendo esta reunión. Gracias, Claudia.
Gracias, Vicky, por tus palabras. La verdad que sí, que es un tema bastante complejo y así que los invitamos a todos a hacer todas las consultas y preguntas aprovechando la oportunidad que tenemos. Ahora quisiera darle la palabra a Rui Costa del Banco Mundial, quien dará las palabras de bienvenida por parte de la oficina global. Adelante, Rui.
Thank you, Claudia and Ana Victoria, for your welcoming remarks. So I am Rui Costa, and I'm here on behalf of the World Bank with my colleague, William Vigil Oliver. And as Claudia and Ana Victoria have said, this is a very complex survey due to its technical aspects, but it's also a very important survey due to the weight that construction has on national accounts. So hopefully this session will help to clear some doubts and to have a first look into the survey forms. And thank you everyone for joining this meeting today. Claudia, Ana Victoria, do you want to add anything, or should I start with my first presentation?
Adelante, Rui. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Muchas gracias por el apoyo siempre del Banco Mundial en todo el trabajo que hacemos. Y adelante, Rui.
Gracias. Entonces, Can you see my screen? Just
Sí,
confirming.
perfecto.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start with the ICP 2021 cycle for major milestones and deliverables. So the ICP 2021 cycle has a duration from mid-2020 to mid-2024. So this means that the preparation of this cycle has started already in 2020, and the dissemination of results will last until the mid-2024. In terms of release of ICP 2021 results, so these results are for the reference year of 2021. We are also preparing the revised results for the previous reference year, 2017. And we are also releasing annual PPPs for the years in between, so from 2018 to 2020. After the release of the ICP 2021 cycle results, we have further dissemination and outreach activities planned for the first half of 2024. The overall global timetable looks as this, and in particular, so for price surveys and collections, which is what we are treating here today, so they last from the first quarter of 2021 until the second quarter of 2022, but this global timetable refers to all surveys. So not only construction surveys, but household surveys, machinery and equipment, all the other special surveys. So this is the timetable for the global ICP office. So in this ICP cycle in particular, the COVID impact is of particular importance. As we know, this ICP cycle was planned to be in 2020, but it was postponed for 1 year for 2021. The risks to ICP 2021 are country participation, delays in surveys, price and expenditure data representativeness, and the coordination and capacity building activities. So these are risks that we are facing together. And in order to counter these challenges, the Intercoordination Agency Group has prepared 2 guides. So the first guide was meeting ICP price data requirements during the COVID pandemic. And the second one, meeting ICP national accounts expenditure data requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic. So one of these guides is dedicated to price data, and the other guide is dedicated to expenditure data. These have both been released. They are accessible in the ICP website, and you can also click on the links on this presentation to access them. These guides contain general advice regarding different challenges that you may face during data collection, and how to mitigate those problems. Another important development was last week. So there were 2 new ICP guides that were released, and they are now accessible to everyone on the ICP website, with the objective of strengthening the alignment between PPPs and national statistical programs. So the first of these guides is the guide to the integration of CPI and ICP production activities. And the second guide is for the compilation of subnational PPPs. Both of these may be useful in your national work. Starting with an overlook for the guide to the integration of CPI and ICP production activities. So a brief overview of the contents. This guide explores similarities and differences between CPI and ICP. It explores the benefits of CPI-ICP integration. For example, in what ways is it possible to integrate ICP methodology in regular CPI activities? What is the current level of integration in various countries? The statistical value chain refers to the organization of price statistics in general, from the design of the survey to the data collection to data validation, and how CPI and ICP may be better integrated at these stages. There is a chapter on new technologies, such as web scraping and scanner data, and how they can help both CPI and ICP. And lastly, on this guide, there are 4 case studies for India, Israel, United Kingdom, and South Africa, and how these countries have managed to integrate CPI and ICP in their programs. The second guide is for the compilation of subnational PPPs. So subnational PPPs are basically what PPPs are at a global level, but for different regions within the same country. The guide explores concepts and uses for these subnational PPPs, the governance issues regarding subnational PPPs, compilation and validation of data, expenditure data, and aggregation methodology. So the idea is of this guide is how can the ICP methodology at the global level be applied to a single country? How can that help to inform decision makers about the situation of a country in terms of relative price differences between different regions of the same country? And there are cases where countries have implemented these subnational PPPs, and these appear as case studies. So we have the United States, United Kingdom, Italy, and Vietnam. Recently as well, we have released the ICP purchasing power priorities for policymaking. This is a document that serves as a visual guide, compiling various studies that use ICP data. And we show how ICP data can be used in the fields of food and nutrition, healthcare, education, infrastructure, environment, energy. So in all of these different fields, researchers and institutions are making use of purchasing power parities to make several decisions at the policy level, and this guide compiles many of these. Some examples of studies. For example, we have one regarding the pay compensation ratios in the public sector. So in this study, what the authors have done is that they have taken ICP data on government salaries, and they have compared with the average salaries of clerical workers within the country. And they are comparing the salaries disparities between these public officials and the average of clerks. A second study is regarding food prices. In this case, the authors are comparing the relative caloric price of eggs versus staple food. So this identifies where eggs are relatively more expensive. And of course, that the authors study other food categories such as milk and cereals. And so they create these kind of maps. And within our visual guide, all these maps are interactive. So they have a button. If you open the PDF and you click the button, it will take you to the website where you can explore all of this data in more detail. On other outreach and advocacy activities, the ICP website has been recently updated. The ICP blog series continues to be published regularly with topics with both global and regional topics. The PPP e-learning course is also available through the ICP website, and the ICP newsletter features global, regional, and national activities, as well as ICP uses in various reports, papers, articles, and blogs. So this is everything from my side on this presentation, and I am now passing the floor.
Muchas gracias, Rui, por tu presentación. Efectivamente, el programa está haciendo un avance muy grande también en familiarizar y en los usos que estos resultados tienen para el análisis y la formulación de política pública. Así es que muchas gracias también por esta presentación. Y vamos ahora a la sesión 2, donde daremos el panorama general de la encuesta de construcción y obras civiles para el ciclo 2021. En esta primera presentación tendremos a William Vigil Oliver del Banco Mundial, quien nos hablará sobre la categoría de la construcción dentro de la formación bruta de capital fijo. Con mucho gusto te doy la palabra, William. Adelante.
Gracias, Claudia. Voy a cargar la presentación rápidamente.
Toma un poco de tiempo.
Sí, sí. Vamos a ver. Si por alguna razón tengo que activar algo de mi lado porque no me está dejando. Un segundo.
Toma un tiempo, William, porque en la mañana cuando hicimos las pruebas, tomaba un tiempo que se...
Ok, voy a probar nuevamente. Ahora sí.
Yes. Ahí vemos.
¿Ven la presentación sin las notas? Solo para confirmar si ven la presentación sin las notas.
Señor William, estamos viendo la presentación con las notas. Si quieres,
Ahora, ya.
swipe, dale
Ahora.
swipe.
Ahora no vemos
Exacto,
las notas.
perfecto.
Ya. Excelente. Ok, la presentación va en inglés, así que bueno, hago cambio de idioma. Good morning, everyone. I have a very brief presentation today where my objective will be to give you some very general context on the topic of construction within the greater ICP work. We thought this would be a very important and presentation to hear early on before you start hearing more details about the requirements of the construction survey and everything that the construction survey itself entails in terms of work at the national level. So first, let's zoom out a little bit away from construction and recall the general ICP approach to things. As we know, in order to produce ICP PPPs, which are produced for GDP, as well as other underlying headings under GDP, we require two things. One is prices, and two, we require expenditures, not just for some goods, but for a wide range of final goods and services. Why is this? This is because, as you well know, in order to have PPPs for the GDP category, we need to cover the whole wide range of goods and services that comprise GDP. So this in practice means covering not just goods and services under household consumption, it also means covering the relevant items under, say, government or under some of the investment categories. So having said this, how do we think systematically about slicing GDP into the various components for which prices and expenditures are needed for purposes of producing the ICP PPPs? Well, this is where the ICP classification comes in. As most of you already know, or if not as a refresher, the ICP classification provides a systematic way of identifying the components of GDP by breaking down the total GDP expenditure into different subsets. So starting from GDP, which contains everything in the classification, we can break it down into major aggregates, things like household consumption or gross capital formation or government. And each of these so-called major or main aggregates are then divided into smaller groups, things like categories, groups, classes, and finally the famous basic headings, which are the lowest level of aggregation for which expenditures are required, and also the aggregate under which the items to be priced basically fall under or reside. So having said this, if we then visualize the ICP classification as a long list that starts with GDP on the top, and then with household consumption and all its underlying aggregates underneath, and then government and all its aggregates underneath, and so forth for gross capital formation, we come out with a huge list of aggregates that make up GDP. But remember that the task at hand here in the ICP is to collect prices and expenditures for the whole classification. However, this task isn't so straightforward. Ideally, we would want to perhaps have one survey on the price side where we just go and survey every item falling under every category of the whole classification. However, this is not so straightforward. The easiest case perhaps is the household consumption case and the items that fall under it. In this case, what tends to happen is a national statistician or a technician from the national office will go to the supermarket or will go and visually perhaps price the item. So there's some ease to it. However, that's the simplest case. The more different cases are other aggregates in the ICP classification that are not the household consumption, say things like government or things like gross capital formation. In this case, the task gets harder because either the prices can't be visually seen or they're not readily available, or the approach for pricing that the ICP requires for this particular aggregate is different or unique in some sense. And as a result, of this uniqueness of pricing some of the aggregates of the ICP classification, we have the so-called special surveys in the ICP with the practical implication, I guess, that these special surveys require some special attention and in turn, some special data collection form. Go to the next slide. Okay, so where does construction fit into all of this? So the first thing to know is that when we say construction in the ICP context, we're referring to gross fixed capital formation on construction. As most of you know, especially those familiar with national accounts, gross fixed capital formation is all spending by households, by private firms, and by government on what comes out to be essentially non-financial investment assets. In particular here, assets our assets are, when I say assets, I mean assets that are used in the production of other goods and services for a period of more than 1 year, for the accounting period of interest, which in most cases is the year for which you compile GDP. Examples of these assets are things like machinery, vehicles, offices, industrial buildings, and even things like software. So having said that, it comes as no surprise that the construction category falls under the gross fixed capital formation category grouping of the ICP classification. Sorry. So if you see the ICP classification here, on top we have the GDP, we have the gross capital formation mean aggregate, and the mean aggregate in turn is formed of categories. One is gross fixed capital formation. The other ones aren't shown here, but under gross fixed capital formation, we have machinery, we have construction, and we have other products. Here highlighted in red, in this box in red, is what we want to focus on during this meeting, which is the construction aggregate, which is at the group level of the classification. And the construction level can be then further divided into different types of assets related to construction activities related to residential buildings, to non-residential buildings, and to civil engineering works, things like roads, pipelines, and mines. And we'll dig deeper into each of these in forthcoming, in later presentations during today and tomorrow's session. So as mentioned earlier, some ICP aggregates that are present in the ICP classification require special attention or consideration. And in turn, the implication of this is that we require special or some unique collection forms. Unique here is relative to the typical or more straightforward household consumption surveys. One of the headings that requires a unique construction, unique attention is precisely the construction aggregate. Again, I won't go into detail because there are presentations that will look into the form. So this will be covered by Aaron and others later on. But I just want to highlight here that the prices requested in the form, in the construction form, are not the prices for comparable and final construction projects or outputs. So it's not the case that we're doing construction, that we're pricing construction in the same way that we price, say, things like cars or different meals within a restaurant when it comes to household consumption. Instead, here, the approach is different. The approach basically relies on us pricing the main outputs for construction and civil engineering, and the main inputs for construction and civil engineering, and the price of these main inputs are essentially the prices faced and paid for by construction companies or the construction contractors who are actually building the infrastructure, the bridges, the office buildings, and the houses. Okay, so having said that, the natural question is, why do we collect prices for inputs rather than for a common basket of construction projects, in the same way that for household consumption, we just go on and collect prices for a basket of say, food items, or a basket of cars? The reason for this is that most construction projects are unique, despite some superficial or apparent similarities. If you think of it, it is difficult to find comparable bridges and office buildings across countries, even though they may look similar. When you really dig deeper into the details, you may notice that there's some peculiarities in terms of the inputs used or other aspects related to, say, the local climate in which these infrastructure projects are built in, or regulations, or perhaps other factors. Hence, the ICP approach ultimately asks countries to collect prices for a basket of common construction and civil engineering input items. And these, in turn, then are the prices used to generate the PPP estimates under the construction aggregate. So very lastly, I just wanted to provide some figures to highlight the importance of, I'm going to close this, the importance of gross fixed capital formation as an aggregate for countries' GDP, and in turn for everything that relates to the work that we have to do in terms of collecting prices and reporting expenditures for the ICP. The most recent ICP cycle, the ICP 2017, which had over 160 countries participating, revealed that about 75% of the participating countries dedicated at least between 18 to 51% of their nominal GDP to gross fixed capital formation. So that's a lot. And in addition, I should add that it's likely the biggest contributor to GDP in a lot of countries after household consumption. If we talk then about construction in particular, remember, construction falls under gross fixed capital formation. Construction tends to account for about half of the country's total gross fixed capital formations, with the other half being mainly accounted by machinery and equipment, and the other aggregate, which is changes in inventories. Machinery, equipment, and other products. So this was just basically to highlight the importance of the construction aggregate in countries' GDP. So we shouldn't underestimate, the importance. Again, just to highlight here, I guess, details on construction itself. This little table here shows that if we average the proportion of construction expenditures as a percentage of nominal GDP in all participating economies in 2017, we find that on average, construction accounts for 12.7% of the GDP. And another measure is the median. So the median tells us that it's around 11.5. Here I added the minimum and the maximum number just to indicate that there is some big variation around these averages. But, on average at the global level, we can say it's around 12.7. This is the average across all countries that participated in the ICP 2017. If we did the same exercise for each region, the average is very similar between, say, 10 and 13. It's higher in regions such as or in countries like South Asian countries in particular. And in the Latin America region, as you probably will see in other presentations, there are some cases like Haiti or Panama who had a very high percentage that have very high shares of construction as percentage of their nominal GDP. So this doesn't include PPPs at all. This is just construction expenditures in local currency divided by GDP in a local currency. So finally, knowing all of this, one final recommendation is that given the importance of the construction aggregate within countries' GDP, and given that the ICP process starts with lower building blocks, and then you start aggregating one category up until you get to GDP, this means that if we were to focus on just the construction aggregate, we need to ensure that the data and the expenditures that we are attaching to this or reporting under this aggregate are of good quality. Otherwise, given the high share of construction as a percentage of GDP, we could potentially impact negatively the final GDP PPP results. So I guess in sum, the final recommendation is that it's important to properly plan for this survey, given its high impact on by itself, and on each of your country's GDP, at least on average. In addition, it's important to recall that there are usually no good extrapolators in the case of prices for construction prices. And I say this because, or just to highlight, I guess, that if the survey is not conducted in the time period in which ECLOC has asked you to, then we will be in trouble, because if you are late in collecting these prices, it will be hard to find the right extrapolators to bring back these construction prices for the time period in which all countries in the region should be collecting construction prices for. So that was it from my side. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, William. Muy interesante tu presentación y me quedo con lo último que nos mostraste en el tema de la importancia que tiene esta encuesta, digamos, y la importancia que tiene la formación bruta, la construcción dentro del PIB, y bueno, y dentro de la formación bruta de capital fijo, por supuesto. Entonces, efectivamente, me quedo con lo último que tú planteabas, la importancia de hacer bien esta recolección, dado el posible impacto que tenga en el cálculo de las disparidades de poder adquisitivo. Así es que muchas gracias, William. Quisiera invitarlos ahí por el chat. Nuestra colega María Paz puso una invitación a poner sus comentarios, preguntas, dudas, para ir recogiéndolos, y mañana en la sesión que tendremos de rondas de preguntas y respuestas, poder retomarlos y poder darles respuesta. Así es que muchísimas gracias de nuevo, William, y ahora le voy a dar la palabra al consultor Aaron Wright de la empresa RIX, quien nos hablará de algunos conceptos básicos y del enfoque en la medición de las paridades de poder adquisitivo en el área de la construcción. It's my pleasure to give you the floor. Aaron, please.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's brilliant. Hopefully everyone can hear me nice and clearly and see my screen. So for this presentation today,
Perfect.
on approaches in measuring construction PPPs, I have 4 slides I'm going to present. I'll shortly begin by briefly discussing the basic requirements of the Construction and Civil Engineering Survey, and then present a slide which acknowledges the 3 approaches used for calculating construction PPPs. The final 2 slides will look specifically at the input approach, which was previously used in 2017 and will be used again in this survey for all countries in attendance today. If at any stage of this presentation or any others, anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to post a message in the chat as I'm talking, and I'll do my best to come back to this and answer them. If I'm going too fast or I'm not very clear, please also let me know. So, the basic requirements of the construction survey are listed in the following 4 bullets. Calculation of PPPs for any expenditure category of GDP requires prices of comparable items in participating economies or countries. And construction is really, really important, as globally it reflects in excess of 10%, and in some countries significantly more than this, as illustrated previously just by William. So coming to construction sector, the question is what items to price. Construction is considered comparison resistant, and the term comparison resistant is used to describe capital goods and many market services whose complexity, variation, and country specifics make it difficult for them to be priced comparably across countries. I think it's also difficult to identify a range of comparable and representative construction products or projects across all economies. And that is the purpose of tomorrow's presentation and discussion, where we will walk you through an item list and specifications one by one, and also at the end today. So the other requirements are that of appropriate weights for aggregation, and that is the purpose of the later presentations today on price collection and guidelines, where we will discuss national average prices along with relevance indicators and also resource mix. So, approaches for construction PPPs. Each of the approaches requires prices of construction projects, products or outputs, and construction inputs for calculation of PPPs. 2 alternative pricing methods are used for comparing construction prices between countries. The first is input pricing, and the second is output pricing, which is generally based on pricing models, such as an office, that are comparable across countries. Input pricing is based on recording the prices of all major materials and labour inputs for a range of different types of construction projects and combining them using weights that reflect the relative importance of each input in each type of project. Output pricing, in contrast, involves specifying some kinds of typical projects within a country and then asking construction professionals to quote a price for building the whole project, much like they would tender for a project. In this way, the quoted prices relate to the construction outputs rather than the inputs, and so the effects of changes in productivity and profit margins are taken into account. However, I think it's important to note that it's a costly exercise to specify and then price the various models required to cover adequately the range of projects in the construction industry. Also, construction techniques tend to vary considerably, and so it becomes necessary to re-specify the models periodically to ensure they remain relevant. Taking each approach one by one, beginning with the BOQ approach, which is used by Eurostat and the Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, in their comparisons. So currently, just to provide a bit of context, 37 countries in Europe price BOQs on a yearly basis. And when the ICP Construction and Civil Engineering Survey is carried out, the results from that survey are linked into the ICP survey. So why isn't this BOQ approach adopted universally, you might ask? I mean, the main problem with the BOQ approach is that it's very resource intensive. costs a lot of money, a lot of time. Data validation is more complex with the quantity of items coupled with the lack of transparency, i.e. no immediate breakdown of labour, equipment, rental and material for each item. Pricing for all components in each project is costly because professional building analysts such as quantity surveyors must be employed, and the models themselves have to be respecified periodically, which is also an expensive exercise because of the expert resources required. Because the expertise required is not generally available in national statistical offices, the work must be contracted out. Although the BOQ approach may result in comparable prices for each model, the models themselves are not necessarily representative of construction projects in many of the countries being compared because of the compromises required to ensure they are comparable across countries. If we move on to the second approach, the BOCC approach, the Basket of Construction Components approach, this was introduced in 2005 with the objective to provide simpler and less costly price comparisons for construction than was possible using the BOQ approach. An important goal was to develop a technique that would enable construction to be priced in major locations within each country, and that would result in comparable prices for similar components across countries that had different labour and equipment mixes because of their different levels of economic development. Composite component prices are built up from costs of inputs, so that's building materials, equipment rental and labour where applicable. This approach differs to the BOQ in that countries are required to provide the first principal details when pricing composite components, whereas for BOQs, only lump sum prices are required. So for the remainder of today's presentation and the next two slides, I'm going to focus on the input approach, which is the current approach used by ECLAC countries. So in summary, this input approach consists of a list of 51 construction resources, which comprises 7 items for labour, 10 items for equipment rental, and 34 items for material. All items broadly represent resources which would be commonly associated with construction and civil engineering activities around the world. The input approach is in some respects similar to the BOCC approach, where it mirrors the basic input approach for 11 items. However, the 23 items which comprise composite components using the BOC approach are fundamentally different, and therefore, on a whole, the hybrid approach of BOCC is incomparable. So why is the input approach universally adopted, you might ask? The main reason this approach is adopted universally is because of its main benefit in that it's not resource intensive, especially compared to the BOQ approach. Data validation is also more straightforward, almost similar to the survey of household products. There's fewer items to validate than the BOQ approach, so data interrogation is less burdensome. And also data interrogation is further simplified as only one material, equipment rental, or labour resource is being priced instead of a composite component in the BOCC approach. So in addition to the bullets listed here, there are 3 other reasons which are worthy of note. And these are, number 1, the pricing of resources doesn't necessarily require professional building analysts such as quantity surveyors, and therefore the exercise could be undertaken in a national statistical office instead of being subcontracted out. Number 2, the input approach, despite its limitations but advantages of simplicity and practicality, was used in 2011 and 2017 ICP cycles and will again be continued in 2021 ICP as well. And number 3 is stability in the approach for this comparison-resistant category also helps in comparability of results across ICP cycles. And that concludes this initial presentation deck on approaches in measuring construction PPPs. Thank you.
you, Aaron. Muchas gracias, Aaron, por tu presentación y por introducirnos a los métodos o a los métodos para la recolección de precios de la construcción y en especial enfocarnos en el que estamos usando en países de la región, en América Latina y el Caribe. Así que muchísimas gracias y ahora nos vamos a mover a la sesión 3. Vamos a comenzar con esta mirada del formulario y nuestro consultor Aaron Wright será quien nos dé esta mirada a este formulario. Así que muchísimas gracias, Aaron.
Thank you, Claudia. Okay, so hopefully everyone can, let me just turn that off so I can hear myself. Brilliant. So hopefully everyone can see.
Not yet.
Bear with me 1 second.
Mr. Wright, you need to share screen again.
Share screen, where is it? Thank you. So hopefully everyone can see my screen overview of the item list.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm getting Spanish translation. Can I somehow switch that off? Thank you. Right, so onto the item list. I've got about 13 slides today to run through on this, so hopefully it won't take too long. So for the 2021 ICP construction item list, it's grouped into 3 construction input subheadings. So you've got material resources, equipment rental resources, and labor resources. Obviously, the total of all of these combined together is 51 items, of which there's 34 items for materials, 10 equipment rental items, and 8 items for labor. And all items are from the global item list for the construction, and there are none which are specific to ECLAC. For the interest for other countries, some inter-agencies, such as the Asian Development Bank, have regional items which they incorporate in their global list. So just to provide a comparison on this, we can see what the numbers look like, pricing that is in 2017, and the red box obviously illustrates where we are today, and then you've got the change to the right of that. So I think that the main change is that in the materials. So materials has reduced by 4 items, and that isn't literally 4 items have been removed, as I'll go on to in further slides. More items were actually removed, and some have been introduced, and some have fundamentally been changed. So I'll cover them items one by one and show some images of them so they resonate nicer. Equipment rental and labour are unchanged from 2017, so that should be good for continuity. So the list of 34 materials for 2021 are provided here. We can see they begin with aggregate for concrete, and the last item on there is electricity, and we have quite precise specifics for each of these, and we're going to be going through them one by one. So I won't read the list out now because I'm going to read it out in later presentations, but this shows the magnitude, and obviously the main part of this is materials. Just as it was in 2017, there are 10 items which reflect equipment rental. Although I say 10 items, in theory, you could arguably say that there's actually 5 items because, for instance, the first item and the 6th item are fundamentally the same. They're both wheeled loader and excavator. The only difference is that the first item is with an operator and the second is without an operator. And that same logic continues throughout. So you've got fundamentally, as I say, 5 items and then the same 5 repeated again. And then we have the item list, which illustrates the 7 labour resources which we ask you to price for the purpose of the 2021 survey. And it's exactly as it was for 2017. So your general labour is unskilled right through to machine operators. I mean, one of the things that could be done is you've got a machine operator as item number 7 here. So the difference between, if we go back to the previous slide for equipment rental, you have with and without operator. In theory, one of the validation checks that you can do is calculate, say for instance, the difference between a wheeled loader and excavator with an operator and without an operator is the same as that machine operator here. But I'll be talking about that on day 2 tomorrow, about some little validation checks and routines which you can do to ensure consistency. So structured product descriptions, SPDs, as I'll refer to on the following slides, are applicable and provided on the survey. There are 3 sets of SPDs, so we've got them for materials, equipment rental, and labour. And all possible characteristics by which the product can be correctly identified for pricing by different economies and countries, that is to ensure you all price on a like-for-like, consistent and comparable basis. And most of the product characteristics are price determining characteristics, the characteristics that influence the price levels of items. So, SPD parameters of items. So for materials, as you can see here, we have the item name, the number of units, the unit of measurement, the price for, the type, what it's used for, capacity, density, the diameter of the material, the dimensions of the material, the type of material for which that item comprises, how it's packaging, the quality, either it be a low quality or a high quality, the shape of the item, the size of the item, the thickness of the item, the weight of the item, what it excludes, i.e. any exclusions, and any other notes which are worthy to be considered. Now these parameters aren't necessarily applicable to every single item. For instance, you might have one where we're talking about a pipe, and therefore the diameter is obviously very relevant, whereas the size is not so, because we know the diameter of the pipe is, say for instance, 150 millimeters, the length is one meter, so we have in theory the dimensions from that information. The parameters for the equipment rental are in some respects similar, some items are similar. So we have the item name, the number of units again, the unit of measurement, i.e. the measurement for which the item is measured against. And by that I mean like a meter squared, a meter, a cost per ton, for instance, so on and forth. You have the type of the equipment rental. You have with an operator, so it's a yes or a no. And then we have a brand. This is provided alongside model for indicative purposes. So it gives you an idea of what to benchmark against where possible. And you can get up, for instance, that brand and model and see more specifics. And then when you come to price an equivalent equipment rental, you can ensure the characteristics are comparable. We also provide information such as the engine power, the travel speed, the operating width, operating weight, operating capacity, and the dig depth. And the last three notes are whether price excludes something, specify, and notes. And the SPD parameters of items are the item name, the number of units, units of measurement, the ISCO code and name, the skill level of that particular type of labor, the salary type, whether they are trained, whether they have to undergo any specific training, the general definition, and by general definition, there are example tasks for which they perform. So these are quite useful in understanding what a plumber is, what tasks they might well commonly perform, because sometimes an item or a trade is described as something in one country or economy, whereas in another it's something different. So these example tasks will ensure that they are interpreted correctly. So we, the RICS, have made some recommendations to the World Bank in SPD improvements for all three types of resources, materials, equipment rental, and labour. And I'll now present to you the changes, the modifications of what we've done since the 2017 survey. So to ensure the collection of prices based on the prescribed minimum order, so price for instance, we have an example here of exterior plywood. And previously we would have asked, or countries would have been asked to price 1 metre squared. But when you go and buy exterior plywood, you don't typically just go and ask for 1 metre squared. You buy it in a board of a specific size. And from that, you can then work out what is common for that. So for instance, in a number of countries I know, a board, the typical dimensions of which are 1.2 by 2.4 meters. And therefore, if you're going to buy 10 boards, it's going to be 28 meters squared. And that's a common quantity for someone who's going to order some boards for the use of it in construction. So that's an added piece of information which we hope countries can consider when they price in the 2021 survey. We've also added a notes section which provides additional information in converting alternative units of measurements. So the alternative unit of measurement could be that you've priced it in square feet when actually the preferred unit is square meters. And as we can see here within the notes, there's an explanation how to go from square feet to square meters. And this is for a number of material resources within the survey that you'll find this. There's one slight minor modification which has been made to the SPD for equipment rental, and that is price exclusions. So previously this wasn't necessarily clear, or it wasn't clear, and one of the countries on one of these workshops last year raised the question of whether operating fuel, equipment insurance, and life insurance was included, because it was in that particular country. And following discussions, all other countries in the room didn't include it apart from that country. So therefore, that country who included it excluded it to ensure comparability. And we now are providing this information to other countries who weren't at that meeting to ensure they make the same assumptions as we had on that workshop on that day. And actually, there wasn't any SPD improvements for labour. So it is exactly as it was in 2017. There's no changes whatsoever. So that's all we need to talk about on this slide. So in regards to updates on the item list, as I said on the, I think the second slide, there's four, the fundamental change is that there's a reduction of 4 material resources. So how does that translate? I'll now explain. So we've introduced 3 new items. We've actually, we made the recommendation to the World Bank and they adopted them. 8 items have been deleted and 1 item has fundamentally been changed. So these new items which have been included for the 2021 survey are, number 1, the plastic pipe also referred to as PBT or MDPE. And we've also got mineral wool insulation, which is illustrated by picture number 2, which you could put in roof or you could put in walls to improve thermal performance. And number 3 is the precast concrete bullnose curb, so on the road construction. So typically for civil engineering projects, when constructing roads, this would feature. Might also feature in residential schemes where it's a requirement to provide the road as part of the scheme. So the removed items are the softwood for joinery, number 1. Number 2 is metal storage tank. Number 3 is the standby generator. Number 4 is the steel pipe. Number 5 is the electric pump. Number 6 is the solar panel, and number 7 is the electric exhaust fan, and number 8 is the air conditioning unit. Apologies for confusions here. I've actually put the second number beside the first, which refers to the image to the right. I should have deleted these numbers here and reordered accordingly, but I appear to have forgotten that. But I mean, the main message here are for instance, we have a electric pump, a standby generator, solar panel, electric exhaust fan, and air conditioning unit. These are 5 mechanical and electrical items specific to materials, which in the past has proved it's very problematic in validation, because how the technology differs from one country to another is radical, and interpretation and is being completely off the scale, and consequently pricing disparity for these items have been so large that in each survey, certainly that we've been involved in 2011 and 2017, these were discounted. And it was our recommendation that, because obviously there is a machinery and equipment survey, that these are picked up as part of that. This survey focuses on your traditional materials as opposed to mechanical and electrical, which are, although relevant, are also captured in that other survey. So these are the 8 items which have been removed. There's also been one item which has fundamentally changed, and that is in 2017, it was the cast iron drain pipe, and this is now a PVCU drain pipe in 2021, because following discussion with countries, it's more of a common material for which drain pipe would be made of. So we've specified this in the survey. And that concludes this presentation. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a ti, Aaron. Claramente este panorama sobre el cuestionario, su composición y los principales cambios respecto de la ronda 2017, con las ilustraciones, las fotos que están ahí, son muy aclaratorias. Y bueno, decirles a todos los participantes que estas presentaciones estarán todas disponibles en el sitio web de esta reunión, que se los vamos a poner ahí en el chat. Y entonces, agradecerte nuevamente por todo este panorama, con todo lo que nos comentaste. Ahora pasaríamos en más en detalle a la presentación sobre los lineamientos para la recolección de precios y con las especificaciones que hay que tomar en consideración a la hora de hacer la recolección para poder llenar esta encuesta y para poder hacer este requerimiento del programa. Así es que, Aaron, nuevamente te damos las gracias y te doy la palabra.
Thank you. I'll just load up my presentation, bear with me.
Okay, you can put in a slideshow and keep going. Okay,
Brilliant. Thank you.
don't worry.
Brilliant. So hopefully everyone can see the price collections and guidelines introducing slide. Is that good for everyone?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. So today I'm going to present 24 slides which cover the price collection and guidelines associated with the 2021 ICP Construction and Civil Engineering Survey. So the agenda for today's presentation is set out as follows. So the next 8 slides are going to elaborate on pricing guidelines and provide detailed information, I should say, on what should and shouldn't be included when pricing. I'm then going to present 7 slides on relevance indicators, and 5 will follow after this, which cover resource mixes. I'm then going to conclude presenting 3 slides on why relevance indicators and resource mixes are important for this survey. So, price collection and guidelines. The pricing of construction inputs should reflect the item specifications in the item catalogue. And prices should be provided for items that are commonly available and commonly used in your countries. We ask you to please not price items that are available and precisely match the item description if that involves pricing a special item that's not generally available or used in your construction or your country. Any deviations, differences or whatever from the item specifications for the items which you price must be clearly noted. I think this is really, really important. So we emphasize to countries to provide as much information as possible. So when we or whoever is validating countries, they can interpret it with more meaningfulness. So we know exactly what's different if it's not precisely what has been specified. The basis of the National Accounts valuation of the expenditures on GDP is the purchaser's price, which is the amount paid by the purchasers excluding any deductible VAT in order to take delivery of a unit of good or service at the time and place required by the purchasers. So number 1, the reference year. Economies are asked to provide annual and national average prices in their national currency with a reference year of 2021. Annual averages mean prices that are an average over the year. Mid-year prices are acceptable, and that average different price levels across the economy and across different types and sizes of projects. So I think it's really important. Mid-year prices assume that the year is a normal year and prescribe to keep survey workload as a minimum. The aim is to get annual average prices. As such, the survey can be conducted either at more frequent intervals or else could be considered for collection at a time later during the year when prices can be considered as stable and representative. Number 2, the geographic location of a price. Construction prices can vary across economies, especially large ones, because of factors such as local resources and distribution costs, geographic, seismic or climatic conditions, and also local market conditions. If there's a real demand for something or a surplus, obviously supply and demand are major variables which warrants consideration. Sometimes these variations can be significant, and respondents should consider the extent of geographical variation when pricing items and make a judgment on what is a realistic national average. So we've also got the 3rd item, which is contractor prices. So the prices which you collect and provide should be those paid by construction contractors to their suppliers. So for materials and products, these are typically the prices paid after any discounts to manufacturers or intermediaries and include all non-recoverable taxes. For equipment rental, these prices should be the rental charges paid to the hire companies or the internal hire rates. And for labour, the price should be the cost to the contractor, of employing workers, in addition to pre-tax wages to the worker, including additional costs to the employer for accident, health insurance, pensions, etc. Labour rates should also include any off-the-book or envelope payments if they are typically made to construction workers in your country. So number 4, for labour prices, please indicate in the notes and comments column typical employment conditions for different types of workers. For example, if they're paid daily or employed on a permanent basis. So again, please, can you provide as much information as possible, not just the prices, but what the prices refer to assist in the validation efforts later on. Number 5 is to help us ensure comparability with rates from other economies. NIA should confirm if the above rates are gross, and by that we mean the cost of labour to the contractor as described above, or net, i.e. the rates paid to workers after deduction of taxes and or other dues. If economies have reported net rates, please indicate the overall percentage adjustment addition for gross labour costs against net labour rates so they can be adjusted accordingly. So another real important consideration, which is number 4, is the site context. So construction prices vary depending on detailed site conditions. For instance, a constrained city centre site, a greenfield site adjacent to an urban area, and remote sites that are difficult to access are likely to cost more money due to restricted access. It's going to take longer and be more hassle for companies to deliver to them. And when pricing items, respondents should assume reasonable site context with good access. Please don't price for something with restricted access, because obviously your price is going to probably be more expensive, and that's an inconsistent assumption to what we ask other countries to make. And then the 5th thing to consider is the size of the project. And the size of projects can influence the cost of resources, particularly materials and equipment rental. And where large quantities and long hire periods tend to reduce the unit costs, and vice versa if they're short and small quantities and short hire periods. We ask you all to price assuming a mid-sized project, and by that we mean projects that are not unusually small or unusually large. So we also have pricing alternative materials. Materials included in the construction and civil engineering survey are selected on the basis of their common use across economies. However, listed materials are not always available or used in all economies, and in some cases, equivalents of those materials must be selected and priced. And when equivalent materials are priced, economies are required, again, emphasizing what I've already said, to provide and include supplementary text, providing clarity to what the fundamental difference is to what has been specified. Again, this allows the ICP construction experts and NSIs or NIAs to assess the equivalent material for comparability. And should it be a recurring theme for multiple countries, the World Bank can consider and potentially adopt it for incorporation in future surveys, as has been done with the PVCU drain pipe shown in the previous presentation. For example, when economies do not have clay and use alternative materials for bricks, prices for the alternative bricks should be provided together with the alternative specification confirming what they are made of. In the event economies don't price bricks, but instead use concrete blocks. Prices for concrete blocks should not be provided for bricks because they aren't considered an equivalent to bricks and are therefore incomparable. In this case, the brick item wouldn't be priced. If a country is in doubt, they should price the item, but it's essential they provide information which explains the difference, so the ICP construction expert can make a decision based on the information provided in the specifics. So now I'm providing an illustration of an example of a pricing survey form, which you'll see. So highlighted in green are the variables which you will need to populate for data collection. And on this form, for instance, we have the respondent information. That's the company for which provided the price, their contact details, and also specifics concerning the item priced. So we can see here that this item priced is the aggregate for concrete. They've priced 1 meter cubed. The minimum order quantity is 5 meters cubed, and it explains information such as what they've priced differs to what has been requested. So we can see, for instance, on the size of the aggregate and the size of the aggregate we request countries to prices ranges between 9.5 millimeters to 37.5 millimeters, and that's the size of the particles from a diameter perspective. And we can see here that this particular country is priced for 20 millimeter aggregate. We can also see that it's been delivered by tipper truck, and we've got the price for it alongside the various other valid information which has been observed. So on to relevance indicators. Construction has 3 basic headings, as mentioned by William in his presentation earlier, and these are residential buildings, non-residential buildings, and civil engineering works. And we break these down further. So the 51 construction items, input items, which are grouped into the 3 subheadings of materials, equipment rental, and labour, are allocated under each of these 3 basic headings, i.e. there's 9 instances of them. So we can see that residential includes materials, equipment rental, and labour, and the same can be said for non-residential and civil engineering works. And this is where it's really important, because obviously whatever is relevant, or the relevant indicator for a residential project, isn't necessarily the same as a non-residential or a civil engineering works project. In fact, it's unlikely they are going to be the same. They're almost always different. And generally speaking, civil engineering works have fewer items of the 34 materials which are applicable for that particular basic heading. So items included in the equipment rental and labour are included in all 3 basic headings. And by that we mean, so that there's obviously, we know 10 equipment rental and 7 labour, so they are all included. So countries aren't required to select the relevant indicator for these particular resources. However, not all items under materials are necessarily relevant, and it is for this which we need you to tell us what is relevant for each basic heading. Hence, countries are required to consult potentially a national construction expert and identify whether a material is commonly used, and that is whether the material in question is relevant for each basic heading. So we can see here, construction is the, obviously the overarching PPP, which is then calculated from the residential buildings PPPs, non-residential PPPs, and civil engineering works PPPs, which are then subsets of these. So this last line here underlines what the requirement of you is. So we can see that for each of the materials, you need to identify which items are relevant to the basic headings. You don't need to worry about what items are relevant to the basic headings for equipment rental and labour for each of the basic headings above, because they're all considered relevant. So it's only the materials which you need to populate. The following points should be carefully considered when classifying material inputs as relevant or not relevant for each basic heading. So let me just explain this in a little bit more detail. So if a material is available and commonly used in all three basic headings, it should be classified as relevant, i.e. 1 in all basic headings. And that's the thought process we go through. So material item priced, is it available and commonly used? Is it relevant in all basic headings? If the answer to all of those is yes, then mark a 1 in all of the basic headings. However, if it's only relevant in some basic headings, then you only need to price the item and mark it as relevant, i.e. 1, in the basic heading where it is relevant, and where it is not relevant, mark it as a 0. And if it's not relevant in all basic headings, price the item and mark it as not relevant, i.e. 0 in all basic headings. Lastly, if that material item is not available and not used, you don't need to price the item, as relevance to basic heading is not applicable because it's not obviously available and used in your particular country. So to try and explain that a little bit more simply and bring it to life, here are regional relevance indicators which featured in the ICP in 2017. So we can see here, for instance, the number of, and this is the list of materials or an extract of that. We've got 28 materials for this region which was considered relevant. So we can see aggregate for concrete, sand for concrete and mortar, softwood for carpentry was considered relevant for the residential building. However, precast concrete slabs was not considered relevant and therefore had a 0. In contrast, that same precast concrete slab is actually relevant and applicable for non-residential buildings, where there's more relevant indicators which have been selected. Like I said earlier on, the civil engineering tends to have fewer items which are relevant, as we can see here with all of the 0s, which obviously are items which aren't relevant for that particular basic heading. And we can see here the remaining list. So you've got all 28, 32 and 19 relevance indicators provided on these slides, which will obviously be shared with you after this presentation today for you to see. Each participating country provided ECLAC with its relevance indicators of the material inputs for the 2017 ICP. However, as recommended by the expert group and approved by the Regional Advisory Board, a single set of relevance indicators at regional level, after studying the economy level inputs and the global relevance indicators from the World Bank, were used, we believe, and the one in the table were finally used as a common set of regional indicators of relevance for all countries in 2017. In 2011 and 2005, ICP, a common set of relevance indicators were also implemented. Although these were adopted, we provide these to you for comparable purposes. We please ask you all to, obviously you can look at it, but we ask you not to copy this, but actually to consider it in respect of your own country for each item. And obviously you can see what you did for the regional relevance indicators for 2017 as part of your submission as a comparator as well. So onto the resource mix. So resource mix is the cost of materials, equipment and labour expressed as a percentage. The share of the total expenditure value of each basic heading, residential, non-residential and civil engineering. These percentage shares in different clusters of economies are dependent on the skills and technology available in the economies and on other factors. Average values can vary from economy to economy, within economy and across different types of work. There can be trade-offs between the skill levels and the price of labour. Highly skilled labour is generally more expensive, but the quantity of work as required might be relatively low and vice versa, but that's not always the case and applicable. In most economies and in most types of work, although not necessarily in civil engineering, it must be noted, the typical proportion of construction values are in the range of as follows. So materials might be between 50 to 75%, equipment rental might be between 5 and 20%, and labour might be between 20 to 40%. But again, just to emphasise, if what you consider in your market is outside of these ranges, please provide it. This is just a general consensus overview of what we have found based on our previous experience. In civil engineering works, the relative significance of labour and equipment can be reversed, and materials may not be the most significant component. The value of construction work in each basic heading varies from economy to economy and from year to year. In larger, more developed economies, there may be longer-term regular patterns in construction investment. However, in smaller and less developed economies, the mix can vary substantially from one year to another. And of the three basic headings, civil engineering works tends to be the most variable, as I mentioned just before, particularly in smaller or less developed economies. Information on resource mixes is collected primarily during the price survey. In cases where the national construction experts are not able to provide this information, or there is considerable doubt about the reliability of this information, default values that have been estimated on the basis of gross national income per capita, indicative of the level of development of the economies, and relative construction labour costs can be used. And here we have a slide of the initial estimates for resource mixes used in the ICP for 2011. And what we have here is it based on the 2010 gross national income per capita, calculated using the World Bank Atlas method. And this reflects 215 economies, which have been divided into 3 income groups, and the income low, middle, and high. The definition of what this is listed here, and we can see the resource mix, and i.e. the percentage associated of material, equipment, and labour for a residential building, for instance. For a low income economy, it would be 62.5% of the money spent would be on materials, 15% of the money spent would be on equipment rental, and 22.5% of the money spent would be on labour. Obviously, the sum of all of these 3 percentages would come to 100%. So again, I'll talk about it tomorrow on the validation efforts which you can make. Please make sure these percentages add up to 100, because I know from experience that they don't always reflect that, and they should reflect percentages rather than values. But this slide here is provided to you again as a comparator. It's not to influence you in any way. If what you find in your particular country is radically different to what is here, please provide that specific information, because this is reflective of 2010 gross national income levels. You know, it's over 11 years old. It's dated, and it's based on a large sample size, but it's very indicative. It's very broad brush, so you need to treat it with caution. So why are relevance indicators and resource mixes important for the purpose of the survey? Well, fundamentally, these are both used in computing the purchasing power parities for construction. Using the CPD method, the PPPs for each of the basic headings are calculated, taking into account the relevance indicators and resource mixes according to materials, equipment rental, and labour. The standard regional approach for estimating construction PPPs is, firstly, the price is collected for the items in the subheadings, materials, equipment rental, and labour, which are then assigned to the 3 construction basic headings using relevance indicators. Only those prices that are relevant to the basic headings will be included in calculating basic heading PPPs. Secondly, the first PPPs for the subheadings are calculated using the CPD method, resulting in 9 sets of subheading PPPs. So for example, the materials residential, equipment rental for residential, and labour for residential, and you got the equivalents of those for non-residential and civil engineering subheadings also. The subheading PPPs are aggregated using resource mix ratios as weights, resulting in 3 basic heading PPPs for residential, non-residential, and civil engineering PPPs. And the PPPs for the 3 basic headings are aggregated using national account expenditure data as weights, resulting in PPPs for the construction group. And these PPPs are published in the ICP report, or will be eventually. And thank you very much for your patience.
Muchas gracias, Aaron, a ti por ir con estas recomendaciones, estas especificaciones que tenemos que tener en cuenta a la hora de hacer la recolección de información para esta encuesta. Ciertamente es bastante compleja, tiene muchos detalles e información para la cual muchos de nosotros no estamos familiarizados, así es que tenemos un buen trabajo aquí para poder tomar todas estas recomendaciones que nos han dado, todos estos cuidados que tenemos que tener en las especificaciones de esta encuesta. Bueno, siguiendo con esta, bueno, antes que nada quisiera comentarles que estamos registrando todas las preguntas que están haciendo en el chat, de modo de retomarlas mañana y poder darles respuesta en la sesión que tenemos dedicada a ello. Ahora vamos a seguir con la sesión 3, con la parte de la lista de productos que iremos en detalle con la participación de Aarón nuevamente. Así es que muchísimas gracias, Aarón, por estas presentaciones tan clarificadoras. Gracias.
Thank you. So hopefully you can see the first presentation.
Sí.
Can I just... Excellent. Right. So now we're going to go through the items associated with the survey into the specifics one by one, starting with the material list. And the first item we have in the list is aggregate for concrete. Each slide is going to have an image of the item. The description of the item will always feature at the top left-hand corner, and then we're going to have the SPD, the structured product descriptions, listed beside the picture, as we can see here. So we can see this item is aggregate for concrete. We ask that countries price 1 cubic meter, and we ask countries to price for a minimum order of 5 meters cubed, or 10,000 kilograms. We've also provided information to countries whereby they can calculate what a bulk bag is, or what the 10,000 kilograms is. So for instance, we've got 1 meter cubed equals 1,920 kilograms. So from that we can work out that 5 meters cubed is obviously around the 10,000 kilogram area. So the type of the aggregate is aggregate which is used when mixing for concrete. The material type is that it's clean, hard, strong crushed stone or gravel. Its quality is that it is free of impurities and fine materials, and the size is 9.5 millimeter to 37.5 millimeter. When delivered to site, it is either delivered in bulk bag or by tipper truck. And by tipper truck, it would be probably tipped into a location on the site where it could be accessed with ease. Notes are that we specify the average size of particles, which obviously we saw in the previous presentation where that country specified 20 millimeter to ensure comparability. So the second item we have on the survey is sand for concrete and mortar. So again, we ask countries to price 1 meter cubed of that particular material. And the minimum order is 5 meters cubed, and a bulk bag, i.e. 1 meter cubed of sand would weigh 1,600 kilograms. I think it's really important that countries take note of this, because this is a new thing in surveys, the minimum order quantity. Previously, countries would have taken exactly what was specified and asked for that most of the time. So if you ask for a company to price 1 cubic meter of sand, it is highly likely that it's going to cost more, certainly the same, if not more, than 5 meter cubed quantities. That's why we ask that you ask for the price of 5 meters cubed, and then from that quotation which you receive, or the price which you receive, you can then divide the total for that, if it is 5 meters cubed, by 5 to calculate the cost per cubic meter, just to make sense on that. The type of sand is that it's used for concrete and mortar, as detailed within the description. And it's washed sharp sand, because there are different types of sand and different definitions and explanations. It's considered fine sharp sand with a moisture content of 7.5%. Again, just as with the aggregate, this is likely to be delivered in bulk bag or by a tipper truck into an area on the site. And we ask that countries specify the moisture content of the sand if that's known. So the next item we have on the survey is softwood for carpentry. And we ask that countries price or provide us the price per meter for softwood. However, when you're obtaining your prices, we ask that you request a minimum of 12 meters of this particular softwood. And then if you get the price for 12 meters, you can divide it by 12 to then provide the cost per meter. This is softwood which is going to be used for carpentry. It's sawn softwood sections, the quality of which is that it is pre-treated to a national standard. And I think this is a really important one. The size of the wood is 50 millimeters by 100 millimeters. Obviously, we know we can work out the volume by the length here. So we've got the width, the height, and the length. So please try to price as close to this as you possibly can, ideally exactly as it is specified. And the purpose for this softwood is that it is used for structural use, so it will need to be of a certain strength to ensure the structural stability. This has been changed the unit of measurement to meter, and likewise in previous surveys it wasn't measured in the meters, I think it was measured in meters cubed, which was a bit of an odd thing, because you don't buy a meter cubed of wood, you buy it by the meter, typically speaking. So please be careful, don't price for a meter cubed as last time, because a meter cubed of wood is fundamentally different to the price per meter. It's going to be considerably less the price per meter. Again, we really do ask you to, where a specific is slightly different to what has been provided, please provide clarity on that so we can ensure consistent comparability is possible. For instance, you might well price a 50 millimeter by 120 millimeter size wood. if you were to do that, then we can obviously assess that and make a deduction to reflect a slightly lesser volume. But as I keep saying, we really do ask you try to price exactly what has been specified where possible. So on to the next item. We have exterior plywood. We ask that you price 1 meter squared of this exterior plywood. When obtaining prices for this particular item, we don't ask you to get a price for 1 meter squared. We ask you to get the price for at least 28 meters squared of it. If you do get 28 meters squared, again, you can divide it by 28 to then calculate the cost per meter squared. Exterior plywood is typically provided or delivered in boards, and these boards, from our experience, typically measure 1.2 meter by 2.4 meter. So if you can price 10 boards of that particular dimension, then it's going to be 28 meters squared, because 1.2 times 2.4 is around, I think, 2.8, and then 2.8 times 10 is 28. So if you have to specify the minimum order is 28 meters squared or 10 boards of that size, then you'll be complying with the minimum order quantities. The type of wood is that it is exterior plywood. It's of a good quality. The thickness of the plywood, you can see here, it's quite thin. We ask that you price 15.5 millimeters where you possibly can. If, again, you price for 15 millimeters or 20 millimeters because 15 millimeters or 15.5 millimeters isn't applicable in your country, please make sure you note that so we can obviously assess it when validating. And there's a bit of an explanation here in notes regarding the boards calculation and how if your boards come in a different size to what we've specified here, i.e. 1.2 by 2.4, you can substitute your specifics into the calculation to calculate how many boards you will need to revise that quantity. Interior plywood is the next item. So this is relatively similar to the previous item, but it's for internal application as opposed to external application. We ask again for a 1 meter squared quantity. The minimum order quantity is exactly as we've just discussed for the exterior plywood. And again, the quality is of good quality. A fundamental difference, as well as it being for interior applications, is the thickness. So for the interior plywood, we ask that it is 12 millimeter thick sheet. So the thickness is 12 millimeters. And again, the same notes are valid and applicable. So please, if you don't price for 12 millimeters because it's not applicable to your market, please ensure you communicate what your thickness is, which you have priced. The next item we ask that is priced, if obviously applicable in your country, is the chipboard sheet, as we can see here. Typically recycled wood of a lesser quality and standard compared to the plywoods previously discussed on the last two items. We ask you price this per meter squared, and again, the minimum order quantity is 28 meters squared, just like the plywood. It's for internal application. The material is that it's chipboard. It's good quality chipboard, but it's chipboard, not plywood. And the thickness is 15 millimeters. So again, if you price for something other than chipboard or a different thickness, please ensure that's communicated on the data collection form where asked. The next item we have, we ask collected is petrol or gasoline, as it's sometimes referred. And this is priced per litre. It's a standard grade quality. which is used typically for motor vehicles. And the next item after this is similar, that it is diesel fuel. Again, the price per litre. Again, it's standard grade, but unlike it being used for motor vehicles, diesel fuel, which is used for construction equipment. And we don't provide a minimum order quantity because obviously when you fill up at a gas station or a petrol refueling station, the price is always quoted generally on a litre basis. However, some countries might have it in a gallon price, and we although not on this slide, we don't provide a conversion, we will provide the conversion to get from a gallon to a litre, so you can adjust that accordingly. Again, if the diesel fuel or the previous item, gasoline/petrol fuel, you do price for a gallon or an alternative unit of measurement other than litre, please ensure that you communicate that to us. And if you've done a conversion from a gallon to a litre, if you can provide the explanation to that in the notes, then we can obviously review that calculation to ensure it is correct, because sometimes countries might use, I know that for instance for gallons there's a metric gallon and then there's imperial gallons, so it really is helpful if countries provide as much information, as much of an audit trail as they possibly can. So on to the next item, we have oil paint. And for this we can see that the price that we need to submit is the price per litre. The minimum order of 1 5-litre ton, 5-litre tin, not ton. Ton would be a lot of paint. This is oil-based paint, and the type of paint, the type of oil-based paint is that it is the finish is that it provides a high gloss finish, and that it's the color. The color is white, and it's used for coating finishes of timber surfaces. So there's a note which we've added here, which wasn't in the previous survey, in that it is that oil paint is typically procured in a 5-litre tin. Therefore, divide the cost per tin by the volume, litres, to get the cost per litre, and try to price trade if possible. So I think that's a really important thing to note, and I'll also mention this on the next item, which is a water-based paint. Trade paint is different to normal paint which you would buy in a supermarket or a do-it-yourself store. Trade paint is typically comes with a premium attached. It has a higher opacity. People in the profession use it because it does a quicker job. It spreads quicker, so therefore they aren't spending so long. It also, for instance, rather than it requiring 2 coats, it only requires 1 coat because it's of a better standard and quality. And as I say, that all comes with a premium. You don't get a better quality product for the same price. So, and as you can see here, trade is stipulated on the front of the tin. Again, another thing which is worth noting is if the type of or the size of the tin you purchase is, say, measured by kilograms, which is unlikely, but I have experienced it before, please ensure you when you adjust that price from kilogram to litre, you explain how you've arrived at that calculation, so we can obviously review the calculation when validating in due course. So this is the oil paint, which is, as I say, just to reiterate, it's used typically for coating finishes of timber surfaces. So that might be the skirting, timber skirting, a door, a windowsill, for instance, and those sorts of things. The next item we have emulsion paints. So again, this is priced per litre, and the minimum order of this is typically, we find, a 10-litre plastic tub. It doesn't necessarily need to come in a plastic tub. If it comes in a metal container in your country, then that's fine, whatever. I think the key thing here is that you price for what has been specified. And again, this is a water-based emulsion paint. It is different to the last one we saw, which was oil-based. Oil-based will tend to give a quite a stronger toxic smell, whereas water-based is less harmful and, generally speaking, more economical. We ask that, again, as before, the colour is white. However, the finish on this occasion is vinyl matte rather than gloss. And the application where this is used is it's used for internal plaster surfaces. So for painting walls, for painting ceilings and the like. That is the prime focus for this. As I said before, we really do ask you to try your best to get or obtain a trade price, a trade paint, as opposed to just your normal off-the-shelf paint. Trade paint, as I said before, comes at a premium because it generally does the job quicker and better. The next item we hope you can collect is ordinary Portland cement. And we require prices to be collected of 1 ton of this, 1,000 kilograms. That's meant, obviously, again, with ton you get a metric ton and an imperial ton. And for the purpose of this data collection, it is a metric ton, i.e. 1,000 kilograms. If in doubt, then please provide the precise specifics of what you price. And we ask that you price, you might well price it by the bag, as we can see in the picture here. So the minimum order for a 40 kilogram bag, as what's typically experienced in the UK and other European countries. To get your 1,000 kilograms, you'd need to ask for 25 times 40 kilogram bags to get to your 1,000 kilograms. Obviously, if a bag is of a different size in your local country, it might be 100 kilograms, it might be 20 kilograms, then obviously, if it is 100 kilograms a bag, you don't want 25 bags of 100 kilograms because that's going to be considerably more. However, you could use that if you so wish, because this is the minimum order, not the maximum order. The type of cement is that it is, as it says it is up here, it's ordinary Portland cement. It also, as well as being provided in bags, as we can see the calculation here and in the description or in the picture, it might also be delivered in bulk to the site. So it might well just come into the site. It might be in a large container and then be dropped into a silo. But obviously you can't just dump cement like you can with aggregate and sand, because once you get water and other things in cement, obviously it kind of isn't of the quality that you need when mixing. It is really important. That's why it's generally procured in bags, but it can be procured in bulk delivery if that's typical for your country. So please consider that as well. And again, in the notes here, we say cement is delivered to end users either in bags or as bulk powder blown from a pressurized vehicle into the customer's silo. So that just provides that clarity that it can be procured using two methods. And it also explains the way you can substitute in the formula different size or different weight bags to arrive at the minimum order quantity. Right, ready mixed concrete is the next item. And for this, we ask that you price 1 cubic meter. However, the minimum price when trying to obtain a price for this is 34 meters cubed. I'll explain in a short while why we ask you to get a minimum of 34 meters cubed, because that's a big change to what it was before. The type of ready mix is that it is 1 to 4. So that's in the ratio of 1 part cement, 2 parts sand, and 4 parts aggregate. And we have here the size of sand, so 20 to 40 millimeter sand, in aggregate, which provides a strength of 20 newtons per millimeter squared. So that is the specification associated with the ready mix. And I mean, going back to this minimum order quantity of 34 meters cubed, the reason we've introduced this since 2017 is because, generally speaking, if you tried to buy 1 meter cubed of cement delivered to site, as we can see here by the image, it's going to cost an awful lot of money. Although the material cost associated for that item is relatively lowish, that's in relation to the delivery. So if you buy 34 meters cubed, the price for delivery is not going to be too different to what 1 meter cubed. It might need to come in 2 or 3 batches, because obviously the size of these mixer trucks, they only provide so much, maybe 4 or 5 meters cubed. So 34 meters cubed might require, I don't know, 7 visits maybe, but then you might get larger delivery ready mix concrete trucks. I don't know. So I think it's really important to respect that. And how 34 meters cubed has been arrived at is it's assuming a foundation for a structure which measures 15 meters by 15 meters and is 150 millimeters thick. So I mean that foundation might well be typical for, say, a house. I don't, it's not too large, it's not too small, but it's of what we would consider a mid-sized project, as I referred to on the previous presentation. So on to the next item, we have precast concrete slabs. These items are priced by the square meter. And again, we ask that you price for a minimum order of 30 meters squared. The precast concrete slab, paving slabs, that is what they are. So the precast concrete paving slabs, so they're used for paving outside. And the size of the slab, we ask, is 600 millimeters by 600 millimeters by 50 millimeters, or as close to that as possible. I think the thickness is an important one. Obviously, where your slabs differ to this, and I expect it's going to be quite a common theme, please ensure you communicate that in the data collection form to ensure or to assist in validation efforts later on once collection has taken place. In the notes we have here, assuming a 600 millimeter by 600 millimeter slab, it will reflect 2.78 slabs per meter squared. So we've got 1 meter squared divided by 0.6 meters times 0.6 meters, so the area of the slab, and then 1 divided by that is your 2.78. So it's going to take just over or just under 3 of these is going to be your 1 meter squared based on these specifics. Obviously, if your slabs are different, then you will need to substitute your values in the formula accordingly. If your slab is 0.5 by 0.5, then obviously this is likely to increase to over 3 because it's for smaller size. Again, please emphasize the thickness, because if your slab is 60 millimeters thick, then we expect it's likely to be more expensive than a 50 millimeter slab, because there's going to be a requirement for more material to form that precast concrete slab. So the next item we have common bricks. For this particular item, we ask that you price a cubic meter of bricks, which I'm not sure is as shown in the picture, but I don't think it's too far away. It looks like it's potentially a meter cubed. We can't obviously see how far down it goes, but that might well be a meter, and a meter there. The size of the bricks, for comparability purposes, we ask that you try to get as close to is 215 millimeters by 100 millimeters by 65 millimeters. The type of bricks is that they are clay bricks, so they're made of clay. And if the bricks are of this size, then the number of bricks to achieve 1 meter cubed is 715 bricks. So the cost is, again, it's for 1 cubic meter or 715 bricks, which it's also referred to as assuming these specifics. And again, in the notes, we provide the calculation, which explains how you can substitute your values into the formula in arriving at the number of bricks that's going to be required to achieve 1 meter cubed. So you can revise the quantity based on the formula accordingly. Again, I think it's really, really important to ask countries to provide this information. I think this is one of the items where it's going to be particularly prevalent, because the size of bricks in one country differ to that in another country. And if this is special size, i.e. not common in your particular market, however, a brick which is, for instance, 250 millimeter by 125 millimeter by 75 millimeters, then please put that in. But obviously, you'll need to rework the calculation for the number of bricks accordingly, unless that is the supplier for the bricks provides you the price per cubic meter. Facing bricks. So this is the same as the common bricks. These are self-finished clay bricks. They're medium quality. The size and the number of capacity of the bricks is the same as what it was before, as is the calculation. So the same principle applies as what was on the slide just presented. I think that the key thing to differentiate between the facing brick, which we see here, and going back to the common brick, is that the facing brick will come with a premium attached. It's always going to be more costly. Facing bricks have a higher quality finish. They look nicer. They cost more. They are facing. They are displaying for display purposes, so you can see the brick. Whereas a common brick, for instance, is for the internal layer of brick potentially, which isn't seen, or brickwork, which is beneath the foundation level. So it's not for display purposes. It's just to kind of fill the space. In some respects, similar to the concrete block, but obviously the common brick is the same dimensions as the facing brick. So again, when you do price the facing brick and the common brick, please can you try to price for the same dimensions. If they're different, make sure the difference is consistent. So if like I said on the previous slide, you've priced for a 250 millimeter by 125 millimeter by 75 millimeter for the common brick, can you please do the same for the facing brick? So then we'll be able to understand the difference between the premium markup associated with the facing brick, and that allows us to look at the difference between your country and other countries to ensure that that consistent markup is like comparable across countries and interagencies. So the next item we have is concrete blocks. And this particular concrete block is a hollow concrete block. So as we can see in the image, there's voids in it. There's 4 voids or 2 voids in that one there by the looks of it. We ask that you price a cubic meter of concrete blocks. And they are hollow, dense, aggregate concrete blocks. The typical size of a concrete block, one concrete block that is 440 millimeters by 215 millimeters by 140 millimeters. And if we assume these dimensions, you will need 76 blocks to achieve 1 meter cubed of blocks. The explanation of how that is provided below in notes. So again, where your dimensions differ to what we have here, and again, just like with bricks, I expect this is going to be a common feature because the dimensions in one country don't necessarily reflect the same as another country. There is a great variation we've witnessed before on this survey. Please ensure you explain what your price was and ideally the calculation you've made at arriving at 1 meter cubed of concrete blocks. So the next item we have is again, it's a concrete block. However, this time it's a solid concrete block. So we can see there's no voids. It's solid. Going back to so there's your voids, hollow. Now it's solid. So the size of the concrete solid block is the same as what we had for the hollow concrete block. And again, the calculations are the same. Let me just see the density though. 7 Newton millimeters. So the strength is the same. So yeah, the strength is the same and the density is the same. But on this occasion, they need to be solid, dense, aggregate concrete blocks. If any of your specifications exceed what has been requested, i.e. if they are, I don't know, 10 Newton millimeters squared, please ensure that's you input that information in notes, because that might be a significant cost driver explaining why your price is high. Likewise, if you can only get a 5 Newton millimeters squared block, that might conversely explain why your price is low. So wherever there's a difference in what you've priced to what was being requested, please capture that in the notes field. Again, you've got the same calculations as the previous slide to substitute if you need to calculate how many blocks 1 meter cubed comprises. So the next item, we have clay roof tiles, and these are measured by the meter squared. And we ask that you price a minimum order of 30 meters squared. And I think that the reason the minimum order quantity is 30 meters squared is when pricing when incorporating clay roof tiles in a building, it is very unlikely you're going to ask for 1 square meter, because it's not going to do, a building wouldn't be a square meter size. You could literally just about fit in it for that. And by 30 meters squared, that's assuming a 10 by, a 5 meter by 5 meter, 5 by 6 meter room. So that's of a habitable size. But I mean, this is a minimum order quantity. So therefore, you might well wish to increase this to a slightly higher number if you so wish. The type of the clay roof tile is that it's clay, plain roof, red in colour, as illustrated by the picture. It's machine made, and it's an interlocking tile or similar, so they overlap one another. So this tile doesn't finish where we see here, it actually goes underneath it. So they interlock, and they interlock both this way and this way as well. It's used for roofing, and the size of one of these tiles illustrated is 265 millimeters by 125 millimeters. And again, if we assume those dimensions, it takes 30 tiles per meter squared. And therefore, if you need 30 meters squared, it's 30 times 30 to get how many tiles you require, the 30 meters squared of that. Again, if your tiles come in different dimensions to those specified, you can substitute them here in the formula, and that should provide to you the number of tiles per meter squared from which you can then calculate the minimum order from. The next item we have is concrete roof tile. So this tends to be less costly in comparison to the clay roof tile. Again, I'll give you some validation tips and tricks tomorrow, which will explain the logic of what should be more than what. So concrete roof tile less than clay roof tile. But yeah, we'll discuss that tomorrow. So for this, as like the clay roof tile, we ask that countries price by the square meter. And we ask that you price a minimum order quantity again of 30 meters squared of these concrete interlocking tiles. So they interlock both ways. Again, it's used for a roof surface, and assuming these dimensions, there are 7 tiles per meter squared. So these concrete tiles are considerably larger than the clay ones we just illustrated, and therefore there's fewer tiles per meter squared. I think the previous slide said 30, and now obviously concrete, with it being larger, is only 7. And again, you've got the calculation for which you can reverse engineer where your size is different. Again, please, when your dimensions do differ, please ensure that you explain what dimensions you have priced, and also the calculation, i.e. the number of tiles that you have priced to arrive at that, so we can ensure that you have priced per meter squared as requested. So on to the next item we have is float sheet glass. So this particular material, it's priced by the meter squared, and we ask that you price a minimum order of 10 meters squared of it. It is a standard plain float sheet glass, and as you can see, it's clear float glass, so you can see through it. It's transparent, and the thickness of the glass is 4 millimeters, so it's relatively not very thick at all. And we really do ask that you price for 4 millimeters where possible, as thickness certainly affects price for this material. We know that from our experience, and also some countries it might be that you can't get 4 millimeter. Again, you can only get 6 millimeters, say, because of that's the standard in that particular country. If that's the case, that's fine, but make sure, please, that you note it in the comments so we can understand and appreciate what your price reflects. We also ask that for purposes that you, where possible, assume a panel of this sheet glass measures 1 meter by 1 meter. And obviously, because we're asking for a minimum order of 10 meters squared, assuming a 1 meter by 1 meter, you will need at least 10 number of those panels to get to the required minimum order quantity. So the next item is again glass. However, this is going to be a bit more expensive than what was presented just now, because it requires not just one pane of 4 millimeter glass as before, but in addition to that, another pane of 4 millimeter glass with, in the middle, a 12 millimeter cavity, as I'm hovering over now. And that 12 millimeter cavity is filled with a dehydrated air or an inert gas to increase thermal performance. So please try and price for exactly what we have here. where you price differently, then please communicate what that difference is so we can ensure comparability. The size of it is 0.5 to 2 meters squared, which is medium size. So thickness further specified. Please ensure you price 4 millimeter thick as thickness affects price. Also assume a panel measures 1 meter by 1 meter, if possible, to ensure consistency. So that would be within the middle of roughly the size here, which is considered a medium size. And the item is for a hermetically sealed double glazing unit and should not include the frame. In previous surveys, we've found that countries price for EU PVC frame, an alu-clad timber frame, timber frames, all sorts of frames. This is just for the unit, of which goes into either a wall, or it might well be incorporated with a frame around the outside. But we do not want countries to price for a frame. We want them to price for exactly what has been both specified here and what is also illustrated on this picture here too. So yeah, as I keep saying, where anything you price specification-wise differs to what we've specified here, please ensure that's communicated. The next item we have is ceramic wall tiles. So for this particular item, we ask that you price 1 square meter, and the minimum order quantity is 10 meters squared. So again, if you get a price for 10 meters squared, to get your meters squared, you'll need to divide it by 10. And we really would appreciate more information than less information with countries for all items in the survey discussed today and tomorrow, so we can understand. So if you have the total price for 10 meters squared equals $100 US, and therefore the price for 1 meter squared equals 100 divided by 10, which equals $10 US per meter squared, then that allows us to understand the calculation and thought process that you have gone through in arriving at that, because we know that countries don't always follow the correct or interpret the correct calculation. So we really would appreciate it if countries could provide that calculation just to ensure it is the correct one. The type of tile is, it's thick, and the color is white or light colored wall tiles. It's made of ceramic, and the quality is deemed to be of a medium quality. The size of the tile is to be, or as close to, as 152 millimeters by 152 millimeters. So it's a square by 5.5 millimeters thick. We can't see the thickness, but obviously 5.5 millimeters isn't that thick, but it is a standard thickness in a number of European countries and also in Asia as well from our experience. So based on these particular dimensions of the tile, you will need 43 tiles per meter squared. So when asking for a price, you will need 430 tiles to get 10 meters squared. We ask that you ensure you price 5.5 millimeters as thickness affects price. However, although I don't say it here, if it's 6 millimeters, because 5.5 millimeters isn't applicable in your market, then that's fine, put 6 millimeters, but make sure you capture that in the notes so we can understand the difference between what has been requested and what you have priced. Please ensure you price per meter squared rather than per tile. Assuming 152 by 152 reflects 43 tiles, and we have the calculation again. If your size comes to a different one, to 152 by 152, substitute these values in the formula here to get a revised quantity. I think this is important, this note here. We had please ensure you price per meter squared rather than per tile. Although I've not mentioned it on any of the items before, and I've obviously told you the what we measure each particular material in so far, if for some reason you don't know how to convert the unit of measure, or you're unclear on anything, just always capture it in the notes column so we can obviously, oh, so you've priced, although it says 1 square meter, for instance, but you've actually said that you've priced for a square foot, which is about 10 times less, then we can obviously adjust it accordingly. Okay, so on to the next item, we have plasterboard. In fact, I'm mindful of the time. We obviously got, I think, just under 4 minutes to go. Would you like me to continue, or would you like to pause and can pick it up again for tomorrow?
Aaron?
Yep.
Apologies for interrupting this very interesting presentation. Tomorrow we will continue with this presentation and with all the details you are giving us to ensure that the collection is as correct as possible. And I'm sorry, as I told you before, because we had a translation until now. So I'm sorry, and we have to left the meeting in a few minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
Muchísimas gracias, Aarón. La verdad es que ha sido muy clarificador para todos. La verdad que son temas muy específicos, y todas las explicaciones que nos has dado en relación a los cambios en las especificaciones respecto de la lista de la ronda de 2017, todas estas equivalencias en las unidades de medida, estas correspondencias que nos has explicado de tan buena manera, y además también la importancia de ciertos atributos que tú has mencionado aquí, como por ejemplo el espesor, el tipo de calidad de los materiales, y bueno, y este tema de los pedidos, que tiene que estar la solicitud de la unidad de medida en un pedido más grande, porque obviamente hace la diferencia. En fin, creo que han sido muchas especificaciones que nos clarifican de mejor manera para poder llevar adelante esta encuesta en la región. Así es que te agradecemos mucho tu participación, tus presentaciones, y bueno, decirles a todos los que han participado hoy día que todas estas presentaciones, la grabación de esta reunión va a estar disponible en el sitio web, y que todas las preguntas que nos han hecho a través del chat las vamos a recoger para mañana conversarlas y discutirlas en esta reunión. Así es que le doy las gracias nuevamente a Aarón. Ha sido una mañana muy intensa, bueno, para él es una tarde muy intensa porque tenemos una diferencia horaria grande con Inglaterra, y bueno, darles las gracias también a los colegas del Banco Mundial que nos han acompañado hoy, a los colegas del CARICOM, a todos los puntos focales de los países participantes con la CEPAL en esta ronda. Darles las gracias por participar hoy día, y de nuevo nos vemos mañana, y que tengan linda tarde, noche para algunos. ¿Ya? Hasta luego, muchas gracias.
No, vamos a hablar
Gracias,
después.
hasta luego.